When I was 23, I learned a hard truth about family. Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most. It wasn't a lesson I ever wanted to learn, especially not at the hands of my own older sister, Sarah, and with the quiet approval of my parents. Growing up, Sarah was always the golden child, for years my senior, excelling at everything. She graduated top of her class, got into medical school, becoming the undisputed pride of our family. I took a different path, working as a pharmacy technician after community college, building a quiet life that suited me. But our parents never let me forget the comparison. Every family dinner became a tribute to Sarah's accomplishments, while my own went largely unnoticed. Initially, I didn't resent her success. Sarah worked hard, and I genuinely felt proud. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies. That changed when she started her surgical residency at Metro General Hospital. The pressure transformed her into someone I barely recognized, though I didn't see the danger until it was too late. The police arrived at my apartment one Tuesday morning in March. I was getting ready for work when someone pounded on my door, hard enough to rattle the frame. 2 detectives stood in the hallway with expressions that made my stomach drop. They had a warrant to search my apartment for controlled substances. I stood frozen as they tore through my belongings, tossing cushions and opening drawers. They found what they were looking for in my bedroom closet, hidden inside a shoebox I'd never seen before. Pills. Hundreds of them. Enough to suggest dealing rather than personal use. The detectives arrested me on the spot while my neighbors watched from their doorways. At the station, they laid out their case. Anonymous tips had come in about a pharmacy technician selling prescription medications. My name had been mentioned multiple times. They had documentation showing discrepancies in inventory at my workplace, all pointing to me. The evidence seemed overwhelming, and I couldn't explain any of it, because none of it was mine. My parents bailed me out that evening. I expected concern, maybe confusion about how this could happen. Instead, my mother looked exhausted, and my father wouldn't meet my eyes. We drove home in a silence that felt heavier than the charges against me. Sarah was waiting at their house when we arrived. She sat at the kitchen table, where we'd shared countless family meals, and she didn't look surprised to see me. That's when I knew. "We need to talk about this situation," my father began, and the way he said it made it clear he'd already decided I was guilty. I tried to explain that someone had planted those drugs, that I'd never stolen anything from work, that this was a setup. My mother cut me off mid-sentence. "Sarah has been under tremendous stress with her residency," she said, as if that explained everything. Sarah finally spoke. "I made a mistake." Her voice was calm, practiced. "I've been taking some medications to help me stay awake during shifts. I kept them at your place because I didn't want anyone at the hospital to find them." The lie was so brazen, I actually laughed. "You're saying those drugs were yours?" "I'm saying I was storing them there," Sarah corrected, her eyes still on her hands. "But I can't have this come out. I'm in the middle of my surgical residency. A drug scandal would end my career before it starts." My father leaned forward. "You're working as a pharmacy technician. This kind of charge, even if you fight it, it'll cost you that job. But you can find other work. Sarah has invested years into becoming a surgeon." The full weight of their betrayal hit me then. They weren't here to support me. They were here to convince me to take the fall for Sarah. "You want me to go to prison for her?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "You probably won't get prison time for a first offense," my mother said, like that made it acceptable. "Maybe probation, community service. A record won't hurt you the way it would hurt Sarah. You don't have a career to protect." Sarah hadn't looked at me once during this conversation. She stared at her hands, playing the part of someone overcome with guilt while letting our parents convince me to sacrifice myself. I stood up to leave, but my father's next words stopped me at the door. "If you fight this, we won't help with legal fees. If you take responsibility and claim the drugs were for personal use, we'll support you through it." They were offering a deal. Plead guilty to save Sarah's career, or face the charges alone, without their financial or emotional support. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I hired a public defender, Ms. Davis, and prepared to fight the charges. She was overworked and underpaid, but she believed me when I said I was innocent. The problem was proving it. The evidence against me looked damning, and without resources to mount a proper defense, we were fighting uphill. My life fell apart quickly. The pharmacy fired me pending the investigation. My landlord received an anonymous complaint about drug activity in my apartment and started eviction proceedings. Friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the criminal charges. Sarah called once to ask if I'd reconsidered a plea deal. I hung up on her. The preliminary hearings dragged on for months. I moved into a cheaper apartment in a worse neighborhood and took a job waiting tables. Every dollar went toward legal fees that barely made a dent in what I owed Ms. Davis. My parents kept their promise and offered no help. Sarah continued her residency without interruption, her reputation spotless. My new studio had flickering hallway lights, neighbors who argued through paper-thin walls at 3 a.m, and a window overlooking a parking lot. The heating barely worked on cold nights. It was all I could afford on a server's wages while paying Ms. Davis. Each evening after my shifts, I'd come home exhausted and fall asleep to the sound of sirens. Working at the restaurant was humbling in ways I hadn't expected. I'd never looked down on service work, but experiencing it while fighting felony charges added layers of stress I couldn't have imagined. Customers treated servers like furniture, snapping fingers for attention or leaving terrible tips. My coworkers were kind, though, and they didn't ask questions about why someone with a pharmacy background was slinging plates. One regular customer, an older woman named Eleanor, came in every Thursday for the early bird special. She always requested my section and tipped generously. After a few weeks, she asked why I looked so tired all the time. I gave her a vague answer about legal troubles, and she nodded knowingly. My son went through something similar, Eleanor told me, nursing her coffee. False accusations. Lost his teaching job. He fought for 2 years before they admitted their mistake. Cost him everything, but he came out stronger. Her story gave me hope during moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing the fight. She started bringing me articles about wrongful accusations and how people had cleared their names. Small gestures, but they mattered more than she probably realized. Ms. Davis worked tirelessly despite her overwhelming caseload. We'd meet at her cramped office after my shifts, going over evidence and building strategies. She believed in my innocence completely, which felt like a lifeline when everyone else had written me off. The problem is the circumstantial evidence, she explained during one late session. The drugs in your apartment, the inventory discrepancies at work, the anonymous tips. Individually, they're questionable, but together they paint a convincing picture. A picture Sarah created, I said bitterly. Which we need to prove. Ms. Davis pulled out her notepad. Tell me again about your relationship with your sister. Any arguments? Any reason she might target you specifically? I thought back through years of interactions. Sarah and I had never been particularly close, but we hadn't been enemies. Our relationship was cordial but distant, shaped by our parents' constant comparisons. She was the achiever. I was the disappointment. That dynamic had been set since childhood. There was an incident at Christmas, I remembered suddenly. 2 years ago, Sarah came home from medical school, stressed about exams. Our parents threw this big dinner, invited all their friends to celebrate her getting into surgical residency. I'd just gotten promoted at the pharmacy, and I mentioned it during dinner. Ms. Davis leaned forward. What happened? My mother literally said, "That's nice, dear," and immediately changed the subject back to Sarah's accomplishments. I got upset and left early. Sarah followed me outside and told me I was being childish, that I needed to accept that some people achieve more than others. Did you argue? I told her that our parents' favoritism had warped her perspective, that she couldn't see how hurtful their constant comparisons were. She said I was jealous. I paused, remembering Sarah's exact words. She told me that maybe if I'd applied myself more, I'd have something worth celebrating, too. Ms. Davis made notes. So, there was existing tension, shaped by family dynamics and parental favoritism. That gives us context for why she might view you as expendable. The realization hit me hard. Sarah hadn't chosen to frame me randomly. She picked me because our parents had spent years establishing that her success mattered more than mine. She knew they'd take her side, knew I was viewed as the lesser daughter. I'd been the perfect scapegoat all along. My former coworkers at the pharmacy were subpoenaed to testify about my work habits and access to medications. Most were supportive, describing me as reliable and trustworthy. But a few, perhaps trying to distance themselves from the scandal, provided testimony that could be interpreted as suspicious. One mentioned I'd sometimes worked late alone. Another noted I'd been trained on inventory management. None of it was incriminating on its own, but Ms. Davis worried about how it would play to a jury. "They're painting you as someone with opportunity and means," she said after reviewing the depositions. "We need something concrete that points to Sarah." The stress affected me physically. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, and dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes. Sleep was difficult, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios, prison time, a permanent record, never working in pharmacy again. The future I'd carefully built was crumbling into nothing. My few remaining friends tried to help. Chloe, who I'd known since high school, called regularly to check on me. She never doubted my innocence and offered to testify as a character witness. Her loyalty meant everything when so many others had vanished. "Your family is insane," Chloe said during one of our calls. "What kind of parents ask their child to take the fall for their sibling?" "The kind who only value achievement," I answered. I was never going to be a doctor or lawyer or anything impressive enough to matter. Sarah's career was worth protecting. Mine wasn't. "That's sick," Chloe said flatly. "You know that, right?" "That's genuinely sick." I knew understanding it intellectually didn't make it hurt less. My parents' betrayal cut deeper than Sarah's because I'd expected better from them. Sarah was desperate and panicking, making terrible choices to save herself. But my parents had made a calculated decision that my life was less valuable than hers. That kind of rejection leaves scars that don't heal. The financial strain became crushing. Between legal fees, rent, and basic expenses, I was drowning. I picked up extra shifts at the restaurant, working doubles until my feet ached and my back screamed. Ms. Davis reduced her fees as much as she ethically could, but the cost kept mounting. I sold everything of value I owned, my laptop, my television, jewelry from better days. It barely made a dent. I was facing the possibility of having to accept a plea deal simply because I couldn't afford to keep fighting, which felt like another injustice piled on top of everything else. During this period, I started documenting everything obsessively. I created spreadsheets tracking Sarah's schedule against the timeline of events. I mapped out when the inventory discrepancies occurred versus when she had access to the pharmacy through hospital partnerships. I built a caseboard on my apartment wall, connecting pieces of evidence with string like a detective in a crime show. It probably looked crazy, and maybe it was, but it gave me a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. I needed to believe I could find the truth buried somewhere in all the lies Sarah had constructed. I spent those months digging into Sarah's life with an obsession that probably wasn't healthy. If she'd framed me, there had to be evidence. I created a fake social media profile and befriended some of her coworkers, casual conversations that revealed cracks in her perfect image. People mentioned how Sarah always seemed alert despite brutal shifts, how she never appeared tired no matter how long she worked. One resident mentioned that Sarah had access to medication storage areas that other residents didn't. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Brenda worked as a nurse at Metro General and had matched with me on a dating app. We'd gone out twice. I'd kept my legal troubles quiet, but after a few drinks, she mentioned she worked with my sister. My hands shook as Brenda casually continued talking about hospital gossip. Rachel had recently been questioned by hospital administration about missing medications from the surgical floor, Brenda said. Nothing formal, just an inquiry. Brenda said Sarah had deflected suspicion by suggesting a pharmacy technician she knew might be involved. Me. Sarah had pointed them toward me. I wanted to scream. Instead, I excused myself to the bathroom and called Ms. Davis from a stall, whispering frantically about what I'd learned. She told me to stay calm, to find out everything I could, but not to reveal my connection to the case yet. When I returned to the table, I steered the conversation back to the hospital investigation as naturally as possible. Brenda was happy to share more details, probably relieved to have someone outside work to vent to about the drama. The weird thing is the medications that went missing correspond exactly to what they found at your sister's place, Brenda said, and my stomach dropped. Wait, you said your name was... She connected the dots mid-sentence. Her expression shifted from friendly to shocked as she realized she'd been gossiping about my case without knowing it. You're Sarah's sister, she said slowly. The one who got arrested. There was no point denying it. I nodded, watching her process this information. I prepared for her to make an excuse and leave, to distance herself from the scandal like everyone else. Instead, Brenda leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. You don't look like someone who deals drugs. I'm not, I said quietly. Someone set me up. I think you can guess who. Understanding dawned on Brenda's face. She'd worked with Sarah long enough to observe her behaviors. Had probably noticed things that seemed off. Hospital staff see everything, even when people think they're being subtle. Sarah's always wired, Brenda said thoughtfully. Even after 30-hour shifts, she's got this manic energy. I thought she was just naturally like that, but now... She trailed off, implications hanging between us. We talked for another hour. Brenda described Sarah's patterns at work, how she had access to medication storage through her role, how she'd volunteered to do inventory checks that other residents avoided. Small details that meant nothing individually, but painted a damning picture together. I can't officially help you, Brenda said as we were leaving. My job would be at risk. But if there are documents that accidentally got mixed up in my bag, and those documents accidentally got left somewhere you might find them, well, accidents happen. Hope sparked in my chest for the first time in months. I understand accidents. 2 weeks later, we met again. Brenda brought a folder of copied documents that she placed on the table between us without comment. Inside were records from the hospital's internal investigation into missing medications. Sarah's name appeared throughout, always as a witness or helpful source, never as a suspect. She positioned herself as an ally to the investigation while simultaneously directing it toward me. I asked Brenda if she could get me documentation of that inquiry. She initially refused, worried about her job. I told her the whole story then, about the frame-up and my parents' betrayal. She didn't believe me until I showed her court documents and the evidence against me. Something in my desperation must have convinced her because 2 weeks later, she handed me copied records from hospital administration. The documents showed Sarah had been investigated for medication discrepancies starting 8 months before my arrest. She deflected 3 separate inquiries by suggesting the problem originated from external sources, specifically mentioning the pharmacy where I worked. The timing was perfect. Sarah had been stealing medications for her own use, got caught, and systematically built a case against me to save herself. I brought this to Ms. Davis immediately. She recognized the value, but warned me it might not be enough. The documents showed Sarah under investigation, but didn't prove she'd planted drugs in my apartment. We needed more. I decided to go directly to the source. I called Sarah and asked to meet, saying I wanted to discuss a plea deal. She agreed quickly, probably relieved I was finally giving up. We met at a coffee shop near her hospital, and I came prepared. I wore a wire. I checked the laws in our state first. Single-party consent meant I could legally record our conversation. Even if the recording had issues being admitted as evidence, the transcript and my testimony about what she said would still be valuable. Sarah looked tired when she arrived, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered why we were there. I can't keep fighting this, I started, playing defeated. The legal fees are crushing me, and Ms. Davis says we'll probably lose anyway. Relief flooded Sarah's face. I think that's smart. Taking a plea deal for personal use. You'll probably just get probation. I need to understand something first, I said. How did you do it? How did you get those drugs into my apartment? Sarah's expression shifted, caution replacing relief. I already told you I was storing them there. No, you weren't. I leaned forward. I never gave you a key. My building has security cameras. You were never there. She started to stand. If you're going to be hostile, there's no point in meeting. I talked to Brenda, I said quietly. She told me about the hospital investigation. She gave me the documents showing you've been stealing medications for months. Sarah sat back down slowly. Her face had gone pale. You don't know what it's like, she finally said. The pressure, the hours, the expectations. I needed something to help me function just to get through the shifts. So, you destroyed my life instead of admitting you had a problem. I panicked, Sarah said, and actual tears filled her eyes. Administration was closing in. I knew they were going to find something, and my career would be over. You were working in a pharmacy. It made sense that you'd have access. I thought if I pointed them toward you, it would buy me time to figure something out. You planted drugs in my apartment and called the police on me. Sarah shook her head. I never planted anything. I just made sure the investigation led to you. The drugs they found, I don't know where those came from. She was lying. I could see it in how she wouldn't hold eye contact, how her hands trembled around her coffee cup. But I had what I needed, her admission that she directed the investigation toward me, that she deliberately framed me to save her own career. I stood to leave, and Sarah grabbed my arm. What are you going to do? What you should have done from the beginning, I told her. Tell the truth. I went straight to Ms. Davis with the recording. She was furious about how I'd obtained it, but couldn't deny its impact. We strategized through the night, building a new defense based on Sarah's confession and the hospital documents. The next morning, we filed a motion to dismiss based on new evidence. We submitted the hospital investigation records showing Sarah under suspicion for medication theft along with a transcript of her admission that she directed authorities toward me. The recording itself wasn't admissible, but her words in the transcript provided enough ammunition. The prosecution requested time to investigate. The judge granted a 2-week continuance, during which I assumed they thoroughly examined Sarah's activities at Metro General. When we reconvened, the assistant district attorney looked grim. The state is dropping all charges, she announced. New evidence has come to light, suggesting the defendant was improperly targeted. Relief flooded through me so intensely, I nearly collapsed. Ms. Davis squeezed my shoulder while the judge formally dismissed the case. I was free, but Sarah's nightmare was just beginning. The hospital launched a formal investigation within days. Brenda later told me that administrators had been quietly watching Sarah since our court case made news. They'd reviewed security footage, interviewed staff, audited medication inventories. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Sarah was terminated from her residency program and reported to the medical board. The board suspended her license pending investigation. News of a surgical resident misusing prescription medication spread through the medical community quickly. Her career, the one she'd sacrificed me to protect, was destroyed. My parents called 3 days after the charges were dropped. My mother cried and apologized. My father said they'd been wrong, that they should have believed me. Their regret felt hollow after months of abandonment. "Sarah needs our support right now," my mother said near the end of the call. "She made a terrible mistake, but she's still our daughter." "So am I replied, and hung up. I didn't hear from them again for several weeks. During that time, I focused on rebuilding my life. The pharmacy wouldn't rehire me, which was fair considering the scandal, but I found work at a different pharmacy across town, one where the manager believed in second chances after I explained what happened. Sarah tried to contact me multiple times. Texts, emails, voicemails, all begging for forgiveness or at least understanding. I ignored every attempt. She tried to send me to prison to cover her own crimes. Forgiveness wasn't something I had available. The true revenge, though, came from an unexpected place. I received a call from a journalist writing a story about medical professionals who misuse prescription medications. Evelyn Reed had heard about my case and wanted to interview me. I agreed, seeing an opportunity to ensure Sarah's betrayal became public record. The article published 2 months later. It detailed everything: Sarah's addiction, how she'd framed me, my parents' complicity in trying to convince me to take the fall. Evelyn had done extensive research, interviewing people from the hospital, reviewing court documents, even speaking with some of my former co-workers who'd witnessed the investigation. The response was overwhelming. The article went viral, shared thousands of times across social media. People were outraged by my parents' behavior, by Sarah's willingness to destroy her sister to save her career. The comment section filled with support for me and condemnation for my family. My parents' social circle evaporated as the story spread through our hometown. My father's business suffered as clients distanced themselves from the family who'd tried to sacrifice one daughter for another. My mother's friends stopped calling. They became pariahs, exactly as they'd been willing to let me become. Sarah's situation grew worse. The medical board formally revoked her license after their investigation concluded. Criminal charges were filed against her for the medication theft. The same prosecutor who'd tried to convict me now built a case against her, and this time the evidence was ironclad. She pleaded guilty to avoid trial. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. She'd served most of it since there was no one left to advocate for leniency. Our parents couldn't show their faces in public without judgment, and I certainly wasn't going to help. I attended her sentencing hearing. Sarah saw me in the back of the courtroom and started crying. I felt nothing. Whatever sisterly connection we'd once had died the moment she chose her career over my freedom. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with uncomfortable wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale. Sarah sat at the defendant's table in professional clothes that couldn't disguise how much weight she'd lost. Her attorney, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, shuffled papers nervously. My parents sat in the front row behind Sarah. Both had aged dramatically since I'd last seen them. My mother's hair had gone gray, and my father's shoulders slumped forward in defeat. They didn't notice me in the back, too focused on their golden daughter facing consequences for the first time in her life. The prosecutor laid out Sarah's crimes efficiently: theft of controlled substances over an 18-month period, falsifying records to cover her tracks, filing false reports that led to my wrongful arrest, obstruction of justice. The list went on, each charge representing another betrayal. Sarah's attorney tried to argue for leniency, citing her previously unblemished record and the pressures of medical residency. He painted her as a victim of a demanding system, someone who'd made mistakes while trying to save lives. The judge listened impassively, occasionally making notes. When given the chance to speak, Sarah stood shakily. She prepared a statement, but her hands trembled so badly the paper rustled audibly. "I want to apologize to the court and to everyone I've hurt," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was under enormous pressure and made terrible decisions. I never intended for things to go this far. Never intended." As if framing me for drug dealing was somehow an unacceptable plan that just got out of hand. "I especially want to apologize to my sister," Sarah continued, finally looking toward where I sat. "I betrayed her trust and our family. I destroyed her life to save my career, and I'll regret that forever." Her tears seemed genuine, and maybe they were. Maybe Sarah truly felt remorse for what she'd done. But remorse doesn't undo damage, and regret doesn't rebuild a destroyed life. The judge spoke then, her tone sharp. "Ms. Patterson, you didn't just make mistakes under pressure. You systematically planned and executed a scheme to frame an innocent person for your crimes. You allowed your sister to face prison time while you continued your career. You showed no remorse until you were caught." Sarah's attorney tried to interject, but the judge cut him off. This court recognizes that addiction affects people from all backgrounds and professions. We understand that the medical field creates unique stresses. However, your response to those stresses was not to seek help, but to destroy someone else's life. That demonstrates a fundamental lack of character that this court cannot overlook. The sentence came down: 2 years in state prison, 5 years probation upon release, permanent revocation of medical license, and restitution to me for legal fees and lost wages. Sarah collapsed into her chair, sobbing. My mother wailed from the front row while my father put his face in his hands. I stood and left before the bailiffs took Sarah away. I'd come to witness justice, and I'd seen it. Staying for the aftermath felt unnecessary. Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine felt almost offensive after the grim proceedings. People walked past carrying coffee, chatting on phones, living normal lives untouched by the drama that had consumed mine for over a year. I stood on the steps, trying to remember what normal felt like. "Excuse me, are you the sister?" I turned to find Evelyn Reed, holding a notebook. She had the eager look of someone who'd found a good story. "I'm Evelyn Reed, freelance journalist," she continued quickly. "I've been following your case. The wrongful arrest, your sister's betrayal, your parents siding with her. It's a compelling story about family loyalty and justice system failures." "I'm not interested," I said, moving past her. She followed. "I think people need to hear what happened to you. How a medical resident destroyed her sister's life and nearly got away with it. How your own parents asked you to go to prison to protect her career." That made me stop. Why would anyone care? "Because it's horrifying," Evelyn said bluntly. "Because it shows how families can be toxic, how the justice system can be manipulated, how someone's desperation can destroy innocent people. Your story matters." I considered her words. Sarah's sentencing felt like justice, but it was quiet justice. Only the people in that courtroom knew the full scope of her betrayal. The hospital knew she'd stolen medications, but not that she'd framed me. The medical board knew about her crimes, but not my parents' complicity. "If I talked to you, what would you write?" I asked. Evelyn's eyes lit up. "Everything. The whole story, start to finish. How she framed you, how your parents reacted, how you proved your innocence. I'd interview people who knew both of you. Get statements from the hospital if possible. Review all the court documents. I'd make sure everyone understood exactly what your family did to you." The idea was appealing in a vindictive way I wasn't proud of. But Sarah had put me through over a year of agony, cost me thousands in legal fees, destroyed my reputation, taken my job. My parents had abandoned me when I needed them most, prioritizing one daughter over the other so blatantly it still stung. Maybe they all deserved to have their actions exposed publicly. "I'll think about it," I told Evelyn, taking her card. Over the next week, I debated whether to participate in the article. Part of me wanted to move on, to rebuild my life quietly without dredging up painful memories. But another part recognized that staying silent protected my family from consequences beyond legal ones. They could move on, too. Relocate somewhere their story wasn't known, rebuild without truly facing what they'd done. I called Evelyn and agreed to the interview. We met at a coffee shop far from my apartment, somewhere I wouldn't accidentally run into anyone I knew. She recorded our conversation while taking notes, asking detailed questions about every aspect of the ordeal. Talking about it was harder than I expected. I'd lived through these events, but narrating them to someone else made them feel heavier somehow. Evelyn listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarification or more details. She didn't judge or offer empty sympathy, just gathered information professionally. "Did your parents ever apologize?" she asked near the end of our session. "They called after the charges were dropped," I said. "They said they'd been wrong, that they should have believed me." But in the same conversation, my mother mentioned that Sarah needed their support because she'd made a mistake. Like framing me was equivalent to forgetting someone's birthday. Evelyn made notes. "Have you spoken to any of them since?" "No. They're not my family anymore." She looked up from her notebook. "That must be difficult, losing your entire family at once." "It would be if they'd ever really been my family," I replied. "But they showed me they weren't. My parents made it clear I was expendable compared to Sarah. I'm better off without people who value me so little." The article took Evelyn 6 weeks to write. She interviewed former co-workers from the pharmacy, people from the hospital, even Ms. Davis, who confirmed details about the case. She obtained court documents and hospital records through public information requests. The piece she produced was thorough and devastating. She sent me a draft before publication, asking if I wanted anything changed or removed. I read through it twice, reliving the nightmare in organized prose. Evelyn had captured everything: Sarah's systematic frame-up, my parents' horrifying suggestion that I take the fall, the months of legal battles and financial strain, finally proving my innocence and Sarah's guilt. "Don't change anything," I told her. "Print exactly what you wrote." My parents made one final attempt at reconciliation. They showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen them. My mother begged me to forgive them, to understand they made a horrible mistake in the panic of the moment. "You wanted me to go to prison," I said calmly. "You told me a criminal record wouldn't hurt me because I didn't have a real career. You abandoned me when I needed you most because I wasn't as important as Sarah." "We were wrong," my father said. "We know that now. But we're still your parents." "No, you're not." I opened the door, gesturing for them to leave. "You stopped being my parents when you chose her over me. I don't have a family anymore." They left, and I never saw them again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd moved out of state, unable to handle the social consequences of their actions. Good. Let them live with what they'd done. Life moved forward slowly. I excelled at my new pharmacy job, eventually earning a promotion to senior technician. I started taking classes toward a pharmacy degree, something I'd always wanted but never pursued. Without my family's constant comparisons to Sarah, I found confidence in my own path. I started dating again, cautiously at first. Trust didn't come easily after being betrayed so thoroughly by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But I met Ethan at a community event, and he was patient with my walls. I told him everything on our third date, expecting him to run. Instead, he took my hand and said, "Everyone deserves people who believe in them." We've been together 2 years now. He never pressures me about contacting my family. He understands that some betrayals are unforgivable. Sarah was released from prison after 18 months. I know this only because Brenda mentioned it. Apparently, Sarah tried to rebuild her life in a different state, working in medical billing since she couldn't practice medicine. I don't know if she's happy or successful, and I don't care. She made her choices, and she lives with the consequences. Sometimes people ask if I regret how everything turned out. If I wish I'd found a way to forgive my family. The answer is simple. They taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty. They had none when I needed them most. I built a new family. Ethan, his parents who welcomed me warmly, friends who stood by me through everything. These are the people who matter. These are the people who prove that love isn't about shared genetics. It's about showing up when someone needs you. My revenge wasn't elaborate or planned. It was simply refusing to protect people who'd tried to destroy me. It was letting the truth speak for itself. It was building a good life without them, proving that I didn't need their approval or support to succeed. Sarah wanted me to sacrifice myself for her future. Instead, she lost everything while I gained a life free from people who valued me so little. That's the real revenge. Thriving without them, being happy in a way I never was when seeking their approval. I don't forgive them. I don't hate them either. They're simply people I used to know who made choices that revealed their true character. I'm grateful for that revelation because it freed me from wasting more years on relationships that were always conditional. The worst betrayals come from the people who are supposed to protect you. But surviving that betrayal and building something better? That's the victory they can never take. What's the hardest truth about family you've ever had to face?